Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Moriah Nightly News for this 4/20/2026. It is 4/20 for those of you who know what that date means, and I will leave it at that. From the nation to Moriah, this is today's top stories. The war in Iran continues to wage on in a tentative ceasefire that is about to expire. That will expire tomorrow, Tuesday, the 21st of April. As of this reporting, there are a second round of talks that are being considered. The vice president and an envoy were headed over to Pakistan. That was we heard that on the radio this afternoon, and we were not able to verify that before going on the air. But at least from the Wall Street Journal and some others, there have been the hopes of a second round of talks all weekend. Of course, some of those newspapers, outlets, and whatnot come out a little bit earlier. It's not quite as current, but enough of an in-depth analysis to see that everything is still up in the air. The ceasefire with Hezbollah and Israel is still holding as of right now. And on Friday, we had reported that the stock market had gone up and oil prices had gone down, and that had even shown up a little bit locally around, I noticed, where some gas stations like Maple Fields and here in Ticonderoga and elsewhere had gone down about 10 cents, which is not much, but it reflected at least some of the optimism on the global stage coming down to the local level that gas prices might go down, or that the market is shaky and was headed in that direction at the end of last week. The challenge was that at the start of the weekend, the Strait of Hormuz was opened by Iranian, at least from their negotiators. They said that they were going to open it. They did open it, and then changed their minds and said, no, we're not going to do that. They shut it back down again, and perhaps showing what we're dealing with here in terms of negotiations. So that's where that stands. It is closed as of this reporting, at least of the reports that I could see. It is closed, and so that's where that is, and it is really sending a lot of things into chaos. Last week, the IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank met that's a yearly meeting. They do that every year, but in this case, their optimism was rather bleak and dark. Basically, they didn't have any optimism at the economic outlook for the future, or the immediate future, with whatever will happen. Now, we also discovered that American oil companies like ExxonMobil and things, and those types, Chevron, they are looking at expanding their oil production elsewhere, expanding very vastly into places like Nigeria and in Africa, and making inroads there, and also into South America, making inroads as a deterrent, or basically as a way to find oil elsewhere so that the supply can be met without the need for the Strait of Hormuz, without any need for oil from the Middle East potentially in the future. And so that could really reshape the oil market going forward. And so, as I have stated very clearly, I hope very clearly, that regardless of opinion, we're already into the war, and so it is going to reshape the global markets. In this case, the global oil markets, and I believe the global balance of power. Now, that same radio report, that same radio program was noting that China is very worried, and China has been worried. The Wall Street Journal has been reporting on that as well, and the Associated Press and others, that they are very concerned at the Strait of Hormuz issue just as much as anybody else. And Europe, for all of Europe's lack of enthusiasm at the war and inability to get involved in the war, they are very concerned as well, and everybody is concerned, including the regional nations in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others, because it affects that, especially affects them, given that Iran is right in their backyard. So everybody is worried about it, but so far they have done very little to take action. And that's just, again, that's perhaps my extrapolation from the evidence that we're seeing here, that so far they have noted their concern but have not done anything to back that up. So be interesting to see what that will do in the future. And one of the things I want to point out here, because it's important for this conflict, is especially with Hezbollah, and because that bombing attack that we saw a week or so ago, that was the largest aerial attack that Israel had ever carried out in its modern history, which would include its ancient history because there were no airplanes back then, that it was so fierce that one observer reported it was like bombs were raining everywhere. And what seems to be clear if you read and pay attention, you find out that these terrorists, which are Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, they do not fight fairly. And I think that's hard for people in the media to understand, certainly the American media, where we're somewhat of a distant observer, unless you're in the military, that terrorists do not fight fairly. And there had been reports after October 7th and following that many of these groups were using human shields to basically deflect the Israelis from going in and doing what they needed to do. So that means basically you are using civilians as human shields. And that seems to be the case right now in Lebanon, in Beirut, and in that area. They're so well hidden that the Israeli military, the IDF, is having to go in there and occupy, and so that on the surface it looks and appears bad for the Israelis, because it looks like they're intentionally targeting civilians, when realistically they're trying to get to these terrorist groups that are so well hidden in these civilian villages and territories. And that's basically from doing not that much reading. And if you just read a reputable newspaper, you should be able to figure that out. But most do not, and that is why I hope to bring that to you in a better format. So, also of note was North Korea, a little bit to the east, ramping up their nuclear program and their ambitions in the wake of the war, with Kim Jong-un feeling that this is somehow a part of his survival, which he had tried to be somewhat conciliatory towards President Trump in the past. And it's estimated, this was by a UN watchdog that went in there, they're estimated to be up to about 50 nuclear warheads. They have had nuclear capabilities since the 90s, I believe. And they're estimated to add about 40 more. That's at the rate they're going, barring any kind of deterrent or intervention or what have you. So it'll be interesting to see how that will shake out in the future. I do know that in the past, the U.S. has tried to get China to put pressure on the North Korean government, but I'm not so sure that ever panned out the way that we had hoped, because China uses them as a buffer against the West, with South Korea being at the border there. And I don't have time on this broadcast to go into the history or any of that, or to explain any kind of foreign policy in detail on that, but that's kind of, and it gives you somewhat of a sense of that situation there. So all of this in the Middle East is shaking out a lot of the issues around the world. And the Pope and Trump, of course, as you know, last week had been in quite a spat, to say the least, actually over the last 2 weeks or so, with the Pope saying that God doesn't listen to the prayers of those who wage war and so forth. And I had said on this program that he's ignoring, well, the Church's own teaching on just war theory, as well as the entire Bible. There was an interesting overview of the history of Catholic relations in America. That's the relationship between the Vatican and Washington, D.C., and how Americans historically have viewed the Catholic Church. And that was by the historian Matthew Sutton, who is he's the chair of the history department at Washington State University, and he wrote a piece for the for the Wall Street Journal in their weekend edition, which is worth the read. And that article began talking about the relationship that President Reagan had with John Paul II, bringing down communism in the 1980s. And the challenge, and this is my opinion, is that the Pope went too far to the left and sold out to them, and the president is on the right. And how do you work together with that combination? You don't. And that's my opinion. Now, I will add to that opinion and say that the challenge, and I have not been alone in this opinion, is that with the president's issue with the Pope is a little bit different than the one that he had in the past with Pope Francis. And that is primarily because in this case, so far in Leo's pontificate, there has not been the divisive statements that plagued Pope Francis. Francis had division and pushback within the church rank and file, with cardinals and bishops going against him, particularly when he made statements about divorced Catholics coming to communion, some of the statements he made about gay people in the Catholic Church. A lot of the cardinals and bishops pushed back against that, and so far in Leo's case, there has not been that type of pushback against Leo. So that has made it perhaps I think that will make it difficult for Trump to fight against the Pope, or wage war, or some say spar against the Pope, wage war, whatever phrase you want to call that. And it appears that Catholics are still divided on that, or at least American Catholics are divided on that issue, and where a lot of them are going with Leo, and some sticking with Trump. But that may be in some ways a bit of an undoing for Trump, given that a large part of his base comes from American Catholics, and specifically the Christian voter, but the Catholics make up a big chunk of that. So now I believe that the president is more in the right there, as I have said. But as far as political strategy goes, or in terms of how that will shake out, there's certainly a case to be made that the Pope has a trump card, no pun intended. Or maybe I did. So, how that all pans out will definitely need prayer. Now, the New York state congressional race on the state level continues to move towards its primary day in June. As I know I had announced that on an earlier episode, but I do not have it on these notes, so you'll have to bear with me on that. The Press Republican released an article about campaign finances, and most of that detail I'm not going to report here because it's, to me, just not worth reporting on. Some of the major details that are worth noting are Anthony Constantino's claims or boasting of being a self-funded candidate and not taking any money from any kind of special interest group, and appeared, and by some accounts, to be the most Trump-like candidate. And yet it is Robert Smullen that appears to be the presumptive Republican frontrunner in that regard. So we'll see how that shakes out for the primary. And because Smullen got the backing from most of the party so far, Constantino is saying that he will embarrass party leadership if elected. So that was one of the major headlines in that article. And of note at the very bottom, and I was very shocked that the Press Republican would put this in and not really talk much about it, was that Elise Stefanik had an $11.34 million fund, what appeared to be for her re-election bid, and no mention of where that went after she dropped out of the race. So in terms of campaign finance law, and the talk of the need for reform in that arena, I did think that was interesting, to say the least. Locally here, some of the headlines, as baseball season approaches, because I have not mentioned Crown Point much on this broadcast, and I'm not sure where this algorithm goes, there was certainly an effort, so I certainly want to mention them, is what I mean. There was an attempt in Crown Point, and a successful one, to restore and repair the baseball field there for the Crown Point Panthers, and that was at the with the help of Avery, with Will Dio and some of those local business owners and individuals that took part in that effort, and so we wish them well in that. And then moving down to Ticonderoga, the of course, what's been a somewhat of a controversial sticking point for the community there is the new firehouse, or the replacement firehouse. There was a vote last fall that failed for the new facility, and so now there's the opportunity to vote again. And this one is a little bit of a different proposal. They've basically knocked, from what I could tell, they've knocked down some of the cost of what that would be. But so you're looking at a 12,700 foot building, and the vote on that is going to be on April 28th from noon to 9 at the current firehouse. And so if approved, this is a $12.98 million project, and this is where I believe this probably the sticking point is with taxes, because it would add about $37 per $1,000 of assessed value to property taxes, and raise. So you're looking at about $107 a year on a home that's assessed at $100,000. So that's I'll leave you to just tell me if that's a large number, but it probably is sizable enough in a community like ours. But it is less than what was originally proposed, because it was a 40% drop from the last proposal. So and that 40% is equivalent to about $5 million. So it's about a $5 million less, a more cost-effective measure than the last proposal. And all of this talk about the firehouse comes with the deteriorating condition of the current one down on Montcalm Street. So that is where this comes from. There was a community listening session tonight that that I just learned about this evening, and so I have not heard how that went. And if anybody has any information on that, please feel free to share somewhere in the comments or messages below. Up in Moriah, the at least to give somewhat of a reflection there, there was a town board meeting last week, and I said I was awaiting more in my notes. That's basically because I have not had time to go through and watch that meeting on Facebook to see how that all went, but it is there for anyone who would like that. And so that's there. Moriah baseball beat Sable Valley 7-0. Skunked them with Owen Bobby being the really the MVP of that game. He was pitching for the Vikings. Had 4 strikeouts, only allowed for 4 hitters to go to bat, and there was not a single walk in that game. Is what the Times of Tie reported on that. And from around the region, tying into the national scene, there is slated to be a National Day of Prayer event at Bicentennial Park. That would be on Thursday, May 7th, for anyone interested in that. There was not much more reported on that on the Sun's website at this point in time, so I'm still looking to see what details will come out on that when they are available. So that is a little bit of a local tie-in, and more of a local tie-in to what I had said earlier was on the Pope's stance, was that this week you might, if you went to Mass at St. Patrick's or in any of our churches in Moriah, we had Father Joe had reprinted a prayer for peace by Pope Leo, and certainly peace is not a bad thing to pray for in this situation. Prayer for wisdom for our leadership, prayer for the president, prayer for Netanyahu, all of the leadership could use prayer in this situation as it unfolds. Prayer for the people, prayer for the Iranian people, pray for the people of Israel, the people of Lebanon, the people who get caught in the crosshairs, who really are truly innocent civilians, innocent people that get caught in the fog of war. The president has appeared to be war weary from what is being reported there by the people closest to him, and wanting this to come to a close, and rightly so with the elections coming, so definitely he could use the prayer. And regardless of what you think of the president, it is our duty to pray for him as believers. So that is that situation. And noteworthy on the national church news is that for the events for the America 250 event, they're doing a public Bible reading. America reads the Bible from April 19th through the 25th, and the president himself is going to read from the Oval Office, I believe is what it looks like, tomorrow night at 6 p.m., and he's reading from 2nd Chronicles, and that's the many of you would know that, if my people who are called would humble themselves, I will heal their land. That passage, the president is going to read that, and that is drawing a lot of attention in the Christian media, with good reason, as we head towards the rededication of the nation to God and the coming days of revival that are being not only predicted, but are coming to pass in these days with among Gen Zers especially, and younger. So we really should pray for the world and what's going on in it, and do stay tuned to this channel, as I am working on a special, I don't know if I'd call it a sermon, a teaching, whatever you want to call it, on Israel, and some connection to the prophetic end times, and where to you basically to look at the lens of Scripture and make sense of where the world is headed, and to know that in the end, if you read the last pages of the Bible, it turns out all right. So this is the Moriah Nightly News for this April 20th, 2026, and from the nation to Moriah, good night.